Good day, scholars. Today we're talking about sequence of events, order of major happenings or events in a story. In order to retell a story, you must tell it in the correct order. What happened first in the story, and then what happened next. So as we begin to tell a story, we begin to put it in the correct order. So our listeners and readers can now understand the story. Now the story makes total sense as we put the order of events in the correct sequence, in the correct order. We are reading about second place Stephen. Let's pay close attention to the order of events and happenings in this story and put them in the correct order. Second place Stephen. Stephen Sanders always came in second place. He had a red ribbon for second place in the library reading contest. He had a red ribbon for second place in his basketball team's scoring contest. And he had a red ribbon for second place in the first grade spelling bee. He even had a name for himself, second place Stephen. Stephen would never forget the first grade spelling bee. He had studied the words over and over. He made it to the final round of the spelling bee. He just knew that he would win first place. Then it happened. Spell beeline, the principal said. Beeline, Stephen said proudly. B-E-L-I-N-E. That's incorrect, said the principal. Second place again, Stephen groaned. This year, when his teacher, Miss Lee, announced the date of the second grade spelling bee, Stephen was determined to win first place. We received an email about the spelling bee, his mom said that night, pointing to the computer screen. I hope you do as well as last year. Room 205 parents. The Maplewood School second grade spelling bee will be held on April 5th. The top 2 students will compete in the school-wide spelling bee. Sincerely, Miss Lee. This time I'm going to come in first place, said Stephen. I'm tired of second place. Second place is still good, said his father. If you finish in one of your grade's top 2 spots, you'll compete in the school-wide spelling bee. I'm going to stop and think before I go on reading. I want to think about what was the first major event. What do you think was the first major happening in this story? What was the first thing that happened? Let me think myself. So when I think, I go back to the beginning and I skim over what I just read, and I'm looking for a happening or an event. Well, in the beginning of the story, I noticed there's no real happenings here. There's not an event. The author is introducing us to Stephen. We're beginning to understand who he is, but we haven't read about a major happening in Stephen's life yet until we get to the invitation. That's the first major event in Stephen's life. The rest were just memories of events that happened to him before. But the first major event that happens to him now is he just received an invitation to the second grade spelling bee. That's the first major event. Now I can continue on with my reading, and I'll stop again and I'm going to think about what is the second major event that's happening in Stephen's life. Don't get too hopeful about that, said Jada. Stephen's older sister. Only fourth and fifth graders ever get to the final round. Stephen didn't care about the school-wide spelling bee. He just wanted to win the second grade spelling bee. No more second place Stephen, he thought. The next day, Stephen got started. He had spelling duels with his best friend Kyle. They tried to see who could spell a word correctly the fastest. Stephen always won. Notebook, basketball, hopeful. He spelled words at home with his parents. He spelled words through a game on his tablet computer. Sometimes his mother let him trace the words in sugar on a cookie sheet. Stephen spelled words all the time. He spelled words in the shower using syllables. Shampoo, finger, nail, hair, cut. He even dreamed of spelling words in lights. Schoolhouse, schoolroom, schoolboy. Finally, the day of the second grade spelling bee arrived. Stephen was ready. No more second place Stephen, he thought. At the spelling bee, Stephen and the other students took turns spelling the words. One by one, students would misspell a word and be out of the contest. I'm going to stop here again. I don't like to read too far ahead. Then sometimes I forget what happened. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to think about what was the second major thing that happened in Stephen's life. So again, I go back and I look. And I'm going to start looking where I left off. So what was a major event that happened here? Well, I believe the second major event here was that he began to study. That's a happening. He began studying words for the second grade spelling bee. And that's the second major event. Now I'm going to be looking for the third major event that happened in Stephen's life. Soon Stephen and Anna Gomez were left. Anna must have studied a lot, Stephen thought nervously. She is spelling words without even pausing. All of a sudden, Stephen felt butterflies in his stomach. His heart started racing. Could he beat Anna? Spell scorecard, said the principal. Stephen let out a sigh of relief. He knew this word. Scorecard, said Stephen. SCORCARD, he smiled. That is incorrect, said the principal. Stephen could not believe it. He was so sure he had it right. Anna got a first place trophy. Stephen got a second place ribbon. Congratulations to the winners, said Principal Shoemaker. You will both be in the school-wide spelling bee. Stephen looked down at the floor. Second place again? He groaned. So here I might stop again, and this time I know the first major event was that he received an invitation to the second grade spelling bee. Then the second event that happened was that he began to study and practice. Now, I'm going to ask you, what do you think the third major event was? What do you think the fourth major event was? And again, you can go back and look at the story itself to figure out the next major events. I'm going to continue reading. On the night of the school-wide spelling bee, the auditorium was packed. Stephen saw Jada and his parents up front. Stephen easily made it past the first round and the second round. More kids made mistakes and were out. An hour later, Stephen was still on the stage with a fourth grader and a fifth grader. A few minutes later, only he had the fifth grader left. "This is the first time we've ever had a second grader in the final round," announced the principal. The audience clapped. A mile-wide smile spread across Stephen's face. Stephen and the fifth grader both spelled the next two words correctly. The fifth grader had to pause when he spelled arithmetic, but Stephen didn't pause on any of his words. Then the principal asked Stephen to spell the word authorship. "Authorship," said Stephen. AUTHERSHIP. There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, Stephen," said the principal. "That is incorrect." Then it was the fifth grader's turn. "Authorship," he said. AUTHORSHIP. The fifth grader spelled the next word correctly, too. "Congratulations, Anish," said the principal. "You won first place. Stephen, a hearty congratulations to you, too. You came in a close second place." Everyone in the audience cheered. "That's my brother," Stephen's sister Jada happily told the crowd. Principal Shoemaker gave Anish the first place trophy. Then he pinned the second place ribbon on Stephen's shirt. Stephen smiled and lifted his hands proudly in the air. He didn't care that he wasn't in first place. He didn't care that he was second place Stephen. He had spelled more words than he ever could before. He had beaten almost every student in the school. He knew he was a winner. "Second place again," Stephen happily declared. So, now it is your turn to put the events in order. It's your turn to tell me, what were the major events in the story about second place Stephen? Thank you, scholars. Have a great day.